Good afternoon and welcome to UCEA YouTube Live. My name is Brian Van Groningen and I'm a graduate research assistant and doctoral student at UCEA headquarters at the University of Virginia. I am here today to interview William R. Bill Black as part of his candidacy for the UCEA Executive Committee. Today, listeners will be hearing from William R. Bill Black, Associate Professor and Area Program Coordinator in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies and affiliate faculty in Educational Measurement and Research at the University of South Florida. His research interests include leadership preparation and critical policy implementation, with a particular emphasis on bilingual and bicultural students and students identified with disabilities. Welcome, Dr. Black.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate having this opportunity.
All righty, we're going to begin with the first question, Dr. Black. So if you would, please tell us about your background and your work as it relates to UCEA's mission and goals.
My background actually came out of my undergraduate work was in cultural anthropology and comparative area studies. And that somewhat came out of my background growing up. I had white parents from Texas who moved to Central America, and I was born in Costa Rica and then moved up to New Orleans when I was 7 and was in New Orleans through high school. I'd actually come in bilingual and then lost some of my bilingualism and regained it. But that experience had influenced my decision to look at Latin American studies and cultural anthropology. I did teach English in Costa Rica and then did immigrant rights work in South Florida and South Texas. Was thinking about doing development work, but then realized the world comes to us. I'd always enjoyed teaching and became a bilingual elementary teacher in Austin, Texas, after I had done master's work in Latin American studies and community education for immigrants. I'm also was very much aware of some power and policy dynamics through some of my contact with business folks that my parents had known in Latin America and New Orleans. So it was for me, it was looking at the work of power and marginalization to many ways came out of my experience, as well as my undergraduate and first master's work that I brought to education. And in that sense, it also led me to work that is aligned with UCEA's commitments to values of diversity and social justice for all children, and with particular focus with my dissertation work on English language learners. And since that time, in my own role as a parent with a child with quite significant disabilities, to work on more inclusive practices for students and adults with disabilities. I currently work as the PI on VSA Florida, which is a statewide organization, Access to the Arts in Florida. And I have done a fair amount of work on looking at turnaround, what we call turnaround schools with Hillsborough County schools and other regional districts that I think align with that mission statement. I've been very interested in improvement of leadership. One of my research areas is in leadership preparation. I have been looking at educational reform efforts in leadership preparation. And certainly since when I was both in Indiana at IUPUI and here at USF, I've done a fair amount of work collaboratively with schools and educational agencies, including a Race to the Top grant in which we partnered with 4 major school districts, Wallace grants with Hillsborough County schools and their principal pipeline. And through all that work, I think my work aligns with UCEA's commitment to constantly question and reevaluate practice in order to look at effectiveness and relevance, which I believe is even more important now given the shifting landscape in leadership preparation.
Thank you for that. So given that response. Our second question, you've served for several years as a plenary session representative, or PSR. And so if you'd just tell us a little bit more about your engagement in UCEA's governance.
Sure. I currently, in addition to serving as a PSR rep, I earlier had actually served on a transitions task force when UCA moved from University of Missouri to University of Texas. And I currently serve as the co-editor of the Journal of Cases in Educational Leadership. I began hosting the journal in 2013 here at University of South Florida, and are now in our second term as co-editors. So that'll run through 2019. I've also been a member of the UCA Publications Committee since 2013.
Alrighty. Our third question is, in what other ways have you been engaged with UCEA? So you mentioned some pieces in addition to your time as a PSR, but are there any additional ways you've been involved with UCEA?
Sure. Well, I started attending UCA as a graduate student, so I went before you had graduate summits. So I think I've now gone to 14 UCA conventions. Additionally, I've served as an editorial board member of all three of the UCA-sponsored journals. Before becoming co-editor of JCL, I was on the editorial board for 5 years. I was on the editorial board of JRLE for 5 years, as well as EAQ for 6 years, and did receive the Outstanding Reviewer Award for EAQ in 2008. One of the things that I think can speak to my engagement with UCA in this particular potential role in the EC is I actually led the application for UCA membership for the University of South Florida in 2013. And so I'm aware of those procedures, and I think those become important parts of the responsibility of EC members. I also work diligently with my colleagues here at USF to encourage our graduate students to present their work at UCA. Since we become members, we've always had a fairly significant group of students attending. I've annually nominated students for the Jackson Scholars Program, and continue to consistently review proposals as they come in.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll shift our focus from your work with UCEA to your work outside of UCEA. And so our fourth question, if you would discuss with us your scholarship, research projects, teaching, and/or service that can inform the work of UCEA, particularly the work of the UCEA Executive Committee.
So one of my major research strands is leadership preparation. I've looked at principal and leadership pipeline in the state of Indiana while I was IUPUI. During that time, I got involved in the UCA AERA task force to evaluate educational leadership preparation program effectiveness. So I did that from 2009 to 2013. I later worked with my colleague Arnie Danzig on a contract to look at principal pipeline issues in the state of Minnesota. And in addition, here in Tampa at University of South Florida, I've been involved with the Wallace Foundation Pipeline Initiative with Hillsborough County Schools to look at pipeline issues. And we created a district professional learning community as part of that, went up to Boston as a series of meetings, and have continued to reevaluate the effectiveness of our work through our partnerships, and looked at our graduate outcomes with districts. That PLC has actually continued beyond funding into a professional learning alliance in which we have learning meetings with sitting administrators, teacher leaders, district superintendents 4 times a year, in which we have an interchange of ideas as to what's going on in the university, how we can inform practice, and then they tell us what are some particular issues out in the field that we need to attend to. And I think, given the context of Florida, with really big districts, diverse populations, a very active state role in education, much of what we see here, I think, has application to context throughout the country. We've worked very closely with our districts to completely redo our master's program as part of our Race to the Top grant with 4 major districts. We've completely redone our EDS program to focus on turnaround schools. And I think those partnerships become an important source of reflective information for me, as well as inform my research, which I think is particularly important right now. That has led to a new project and a co-edited book, which is really looking at how the landscape has shifted. It'll be published with IEP. It's actually out in, came out in the UCEA bulletin. It's titled "Who Controls Educational Administration?" And it's very much concerns with both looking at pipeline issues, empirical data about what's going on, as well as broader philosophical and epistemological concerns about the nature of the field, what constitutes academic drift, epistemological drift. And I think that work and those sets of questions in many ways lie at the heart of what UCA is dealing with right now. I'm also working on some new projects with doc students on, in terms of my implementation research agenda, on the rollout of multi-tiered systems of support in a large district, and what it means in terms of managing meaning making, capacity building, as well as rolling out a new teacher evaluation program, and some of the ethical dimensions around decision making when administrators look at high stakes accountability. So those implementation dynamics, again, I think become issues of content of programs around the country. And lastly, I'm launching a project on charter school development and the politics around equity and space. So this leads me to really think deeply about shifting landscapes for leadership work and leadership preparation.
Thank you for that response. I think an extension of what you just mentioned is our last question. And so given your work and scholarship, research, teaching, and service, so if you'd share the reasons why you've chosen to run for the UCEA Executive Committee and what your vision is for the future of UCEA.
Well, I think the main reason I've chosen to run is because I was asked and nominated, which I appreciate. I also see the landscape of K-12 and higher education shifting. As we know, I think there's more of an emphasis on business sensibilities, where convenience and costs are often driving values. And even in higher ed, students are constructed as consumers and clients. So I see this as a critical time for UCA to consider how to best position itself as a consortium of research universities that support equity and quality when there is a shift towards values of cost and convenience, as well as a multiplicity of new actors in the landscape. What does it mean to be a consortium of research universities in this landscape? How do we best position ourselves? Who become our natural allies with outside of the university context, and even within the university context, when often there are more monies available in a state like Florida for STEM fields and other higher paying fields in which you do get more student enrollment. So how do we best position ourselves looking forward? I also personally see UCA as my professional home. Over the 14 years I've attended the convention, I deeply value friendships I've had and cultivated throughout the conventions. And it just reminds me that even though often in academia we see our roles as sitting in our offices writing or teaching by ourselves in front of students, I do see myself always doing work in relationship with others, whether that's in teaching, research. I always read others, I talk to others, I go to UCA and I'll have conversations about ideas, what people are doing, service. And this also was brought home with my own role, looking at students with disability and my own son. I think even more so, I see what we do is always in relationship with others. And given the professional home that UCA has been for me, I would hope that part of my responsibility to give back, as well as to receive the benefits of productive responsibilities, is to serve the institution. So if I were chosen to serve on the EC, I would be honored.
Dr. Black, thank you very much for your time and your thoughtful responses. We certainly appreciate it. This interview for our listeners will be archived on the UCEA YouTube channel. You can access or share the interview at any time. We also encourage listeners to post comments and questions on the interview in the comment section on this video's spot on the UCEA YouTube channel. This concludes our interview with Dr. Bill Black from the University of South Florida. Thank you and goodbye.